All right, so welcome to another episode of Critical Wade Theory. And this is take two because I veered a little bit too off script and I got lost in the weeds. So basically, I started talking about the Hound of the Baskervilles, but I said the Hounds of the Baskervilles. I was like, well, some Sherlock Holmes nerd out there is going to be like, it's not the Hounds, it's the Hound of the Baskervilles. And I was like, well, Jesus Christ, I got to start over now. And yeah, so this episode's already a mess. But anyway, technically, I'm looking at one of the most unusual Sherlock Holmes adaptations ever made, apparently, because this is the 1987 CBS TV movie, The Return of Sherlock Holmes. And it was directed by Kevin Connor and written and produced by Bob Shane. And this film aired on January 10th, 1987, as a pilot for a proposed television series. But of course, it never came to fruition, so we really just have this old TV movie. And you can watch this on YouTube if you want. Feel free to check it out. And the show never moved forward, like I said, but the premise remains one of the strangest in Holmes' history. At least that's the impression that I get, because this isn't Sherlock Holmes in Victorian London. It's Sherlock Holmes waking up in the 1980s. Yeah, I know, in the era of Mr. T and Ronald Reagan and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. It's just one of those zany fish out of water kind of premises. And the film stars Michael Pennington as Holmes and Margaret Collin as Jane Watson, a private investigator descended from Dr. Watson. In the story, Holmes is dying from a deadly illness when he and his brother Mycroft discover an experimental form of cryogenic preservation. So Holmes chooses to place himself in suspended animation until a future age presents a challenge worthy of his abilities. And what do you know? One of those just happens to blossom and develop into this lovely story we have here. And when he awakens in modern Boston, he's confronted by cars, skyscrapers, and technology that barely makes sense to him. And of course, if he was waking up now, he would have the internet and all kinds of stuff like that. He would have social media. Uh, Maybe he'd have to grapple with the MAGA movement or something like that. All kinds of crazy stuff. But it was crazy enough for him to wake up in the 1980s, of course. The culture shock provides a little bit of humor, but Holmes quickly discovers that while society has changed, human nature hasn't. Criminals still lie, greed still motivates people, power is still abused, and Holmes still sees what everyone else misses. Well, except for one instance where he gets something a little wrong. I don't want to spoil it too much, but I do like that this movie makes clear that Holmes is actually supposed to be a human being, and even he can have lapses in judgment or whatever. I like that. It sort of demythologizes and demystifies Sherlock Holmes. And I think this is the second time I've watched something Sherlock Holmes related, so I'm still a beginner when it comes to this whole experience. So, I'm not going to try to pretend to be a foremost expert on the storylines or anything like that. But to me, from what I've looked at regarding this movie, it seems like people respect it. There aren't that many people out there who seem to think it totally misses the mark, and I think there's a certain bit of nostalgia for this as well, which wouldn't hurt. And I actually did enjoy it. I'm not having a totally negative experience when it comes to this Sherlock Holmes material. So I actually do kind of recommend this movie if you get a chance to watch it. Obviously, there's other stuff out there when it comes to Sherlock Holmes, and of course, you've got all types of content all the time. So this is something more like if you just want to get an unusual take on Sherlock Holmes. And one of the film's most interesting choices is replacing Dr. Watson with Jane Watson. Rather than serving as a sidekick, she's a capable investigator who helps Holmes navigate 20th century life. And, he needs it. Anybody who would wake up from a time capsule, I think they would need to learn a few new things when they emerge. And what do you know? She plays that role pretty well. Their partnership becomes the heart of the movie, balancing Holmes' Victorian logic with Jane's modern practicality. And I think this could have been a pretty solid series if only it had gotten the ratings that it required. And the mystery itself involves murder, betrayal, counterfeit money, and corruption hidden beneath respectable appearances. That whole thing. And in that sense, the film remains true to classic Holmes stories. Holmes has always been a detective who exposes the truth behind social status and public reputation. I do know that about Sherlock Holmes. Despite being a beginner, I know that he's all about the truth, and he, again, sees what others don't, which is what makes him such a great detective. And what makes The Return of Sherlock Holmes memorable is its unusual blend of detective fiction, a little bit of science fiction, and some definite light comedy. There are moments where maybe you'll laugh at this. Now, obviously, I can't guarantee that because how could I say you're guaranteed to laugh at this? Well, you might not. You might not like it at all, in fact, but I thought it was pretty good, actually. Decades before shows like Sherlock and Elementary modernized the character, this film experimented with placing Holmes directly into a contemporary setting. So I would say that it sort of, you know, paved the road for these other adaptations which would experiment with the character. Michael Pennington's performance helps sell the premise. He portrays Holmes as brilliant, analytical, and out of place without turning him into a caricature. Holmes feels displaced, but never diminished. That's what I like about this. It's it's one of those things where he adapts to the new times that he's in, and I think Pennington does a great job as Sherlock Holmes. And despite positive reactions from some viewers, CBS chose not to proceed with the series. Ratings were modest at best, and the reception at the time was apparently mixed. It's unfortunate because the concept offered plenty of possibilities, from computer crimes to corporate corruption and other distinctly modern challenges. And, I don't know if DNA was really a thing when it came to forensics at the time. Probably not so much. I think that it was maybe in its nascent stages at this point, but it would have been, a thing for Sherlock Holmes to sort of have modern forensics as an aid. I think he would need to solve some more complex mysteries if if he wanted to sort of expand his role as a genius character. Because nowadays, with modern forensics, you don't necessarily have to be as much of a genius to impress people with detective work or something like that. I don't know. Maybe I'm diminishing forensic science too much. I don't know. But I'm just saying, like, I think you would have to have Sherlock Holmes kicked up a notch to, rival the modern science of detective work and forensics and all that kind of stuff. So, over time, the film developed a cult following among Holmes fans. So, part of its appeal comes from the question at its center: what happens when the world's greatest detective wakes up in a world he no longer recognizes? And that idea gives the story a surprisingly thoughtful edge. Holmes becomes a man displaced from history itself, examining whether modern society is truly more advanced than the past that he left behind. And it turns out we're not entirely advanced. Just a little bit updated with our gadgets and all that kind of stuff. So, The Return of Sherlock Holmes may not rank among the definitive Holmes adaptations, but it remains one of the most inventive, from what I can tell. It's strange, ambitious, occasionally uneven, and consistently entertaining. And I think it's unfortunate that it never got expanded into a series. But who knows? Maybe that actually was for the best. Maybe the series would have ended up dropping the ball at some point, which actually does happen with TV shows. Even, I mean, I know some people who say that Breaking Bad even went off the rails. So, I mean, you're always going to have critics out there, and I'm sure this would have been no different. And most importantly, I think this movie proves that Sherlock Holmes remains timeless. Again, the technology changes, the world changes, but observations, deduction, and the search for truth, those things never go out of style, and that's why this movie still feels surprisingly fresh. So go ahead and check it out. It actually has a little bit of my seal of approval. I can't guarantee that you'll love it, that it'll knock your socks off, but feel free to check it out.